UNSC Research Station, Epsilon 419, orbit above reach, 2053. Dr. Catherine Halsey stood before the observation window watching something that violated every principle of slip-space physics she'd spent 40 years studying. 17 Forerunner artifacts arranged in geometric pattern that her mathematical models insisted was impossible, each one generating gravitational distortions that should have torn the research station apart, but instead created harmonic resonance that made local space-time look negotiable. The artifacts hummed with energy that conventional sensors couldn't fully measure, their surfaces displaying symbols that predated human civilization by millions of years. By technology so advanced that reverse engineering it felt less like science and more like archaeology, attempting to understand quantum mechanics through cave paintings. "Dr. Halsey," her assistant said with voice carrying professional concern that barely concealed genuine alarm, "the gravitational readings are exceeding safe parameters. We're detecting slip-space fluctuations across the entire network. If we don't shut down the test, we don't shut it down." Halsey interrupted with authority that had commanded classified projects since before most UNSC personnel were born, her augmented eyes tracking data streams that flowed across holographic displays with complexity that normal human cognition struggled to process. "This is working exactly as theoretical models predicted. The Forerunner technology is creating synchronized slip-space corridor across multiple star systems. If successful, we'll have instantaneous logistics network spanning entire UNSC domain. No more weeks in transit, no more isolated colonies. Humanity finally connected the way Forerunners intended. Or we create catastrophic cascade failure that tears dimensional barriers across human space," another voice observed from the doorway, with tone mixing scientific assessment and something approaching fatalism. Halsey turned to find Admiral Terrence Hood standing in the research station's entrance, his decorated uniform carrying weight of commanding Earth's defense through Covenant War's final desperate years, his expression suggesting he'd made command decisions before where certainty was luxury and best guess was all strategy allowed. "Admiral," Halsey acknowledged with professional respect that barely concealed their decades of complicated history. Mutual admiration mixed with fundamental disagreements about whether humanity's survival justified methods that peacetime ethics would condemn. "I didn't expect you personally. Thought you'd be coordinating from HighCom. I'm here because what you're testing could reshape human civilization," Hood replied, studying the Forerunner artifacts with expression mixing hope and concern. "Or destroy it. Catherine, I've read your reports. I understand the potential. Galaxy-wide logistics network would solve problems we've struggled with since colonization began. But your own assessments say we don't fully understand Forerunner slipspace. That it operates on principles our physics can't fully explain. That's..." He paused. "That's like giving nuclear weapons to civilization that just discovered fire. Technically possible, but potentially catastrophic." "Technically possible is all we have," Halsey countered with pragmatism that had guided her through moral complexities ranging from Spartan 2 program to reverse engineering Covenant technology. "Admiral, the war is over. Covenant is fractured. But we're vulnerable. Scattered across hundreds of colonies with communication measured in weeks and reinforcement measured in months. Next threat, whatever it is, we need to respond faster. This network provides that capability. Yes, there are risks, but inaction has risks too. Humanity sitting isolated while universe decides whether we survive or become historical footnote." Hood absorbed this with command experience that had coordinated planetary defenses and fleet operations through situations where right decision wasn't obvious. "Then we proceed, but cautiously. Controlled activation. If readings exceed safe parameters..." The artifacts activated simultaneously, not gradually, not with warning that allowed abort protocols, with synchronization that suggested they'd been waiting for exact geometric alignment, responding to signals that research station hadn't transmitted but Forerunner technology recognized anyway. Across UNSC space, Earth reach, hundreds of colonies, orbital defense platforms, and research stations studying similar artifacts, The network engaged with harmonic resonance that made slipspace itself uncomfortable. Halsey's displays erupted with data that violated every model. We're detecting slipspace ruptures, not localized. The entire network is activating. All artifacts across UNSC domain are... Her voice carried alarm that transcended professional composure. They're creating unified field, linking every colony, every station, every location where we deployed Forerunner technology. That's not what theoretical models predicted. This is something else. Something the artifacts were designed to do regardless of our intentions. "Shut it down," Hood commanded with authority that had ordered planetary evacuations and fleet withdrawals. "Emergency protocols. Disconnect all..." Reality fractured. The observation window showed something that human eyes weren't designed to process. Space folding inward, revealing layers underneath that looked wrong. Dimensions beyond the three that normal physics allowed becoming briefly visible before perspective collapsed back into coherence. For exactly 7.3 seconds, every human in UNSC space experienced identical sensation. Awareness of being displaced. Knowledge that reality was being rewritten at fundamental level. Understanding that wherever they emerged would be strangers in cosmos operating by different rules. Then the rupture stabilized with violence that made nuclear detonations look gentle. Halsey found herself on the research station's deck, her augmented body having absorbed impact that would have killed baseline humans. Her mind processing sensor data that made no sense. Stellar coordinates didn't match, gravitational signatures were wrong, and most concerning, slipspace readings showed corruption that conventional physics couldn't explain. "Status," Halsey commanded, her voice cutting through chaos with scientific discipline that refused to acknowledge panic as productive response. "All systems..." Her assistant paused, checking readings again as if hoping they'd change. "All systems operational, but navigation is completely compromised. We're detecting stellar coordinates, but they don't match any database. He pulled up star charts that looked familiar, but wrong. "We're in the Milky Way. Same galaxy, but different region, thousands of light years from where we should be. And Dr..." His voice dropped. "Slipspace behaves differently here. The laws governing dimensional transit have been corrupted by something. I'm detecting energy patterns that our physics can't categorize. Almost like slipspace is infected by..." He couldn't finish because implications were too vast. Hood activated communication systems with movement suggesting he was already processing command priorities. "This is Admiral Hood to all UNSC forces. Report status immediately. I need confirmation that displacement affected entire fleet or just localized regions." The responses cascaded across every frequency. From Earth, "HiCom actual. Orbital defense grid confirms displacement. We're detecting same stellar anomalies. Earth is intact, but location is wrong." From Reach, "Epsilon Eridani system confirms displacement. Colony infrastructure stable, but navigation compromised." From UNSC Infinity, "Flagship reporting. All systems operational. But Captain Lasky requests immediate tactical briefing because our sensors are detecting..." The transmission paused. "We're detecting vessels, unknown configuration, massive, moving toward our position, not Covenant, not Forerunner, something else." "Specifications?" Hood asked, his tactical mind immediately identifying potential threat. "Over 8 kilometers long." Captain Lasky's voice came through with controlled urgency. "Gothic architecture, appears to be cathedral in space. Baroque design elements mixed with military functionality. Energy signatures suggest primitive fusion reactors augmented by something our sensors can't identify. And Admiral..." His voice carried weight. "They're broadcasting. Ancient language. Taking our translation AI several minutes to process, but preliminary analysis suggests..." He paused. "Suggests they're speaking corrupted Latin mixed with High Gothic. That's not possible. That language shouldn't exist." Before Hood could respond, the translation completed. The voice that emerged carried authority that transcended normal military protocol, speaking with conviction that suggested religious certainty rather than tactical communication. "In the name of the God Emperor of mankind, identify yourselves. State your allegiance. Explain your presence in Imperial space. Failure to comply will result in summary destruction as enemies of humanity. You have one standard hour. The Imperium watches, the Emperor protects. The transmission ended. The silence that followed carried weight of implications that none of them wanted to process. God, Emperor of mankind, Halsey repeated with scientific mind already cataloging impossibilities. They're claiming authority over humanity, using religious terminology. That suggests, she pulled up linguistic analysis. That suggests we've encountered human civilization that developed independently, that evolved different political structure, different culture, different. She paused, processing data that made situation exponentially worse. Admiral, I'm detecting additional vessels, dozens, all broadcasting similar identification. They're calling themselves Imperial Navy. They're claiming this region belongs to something called the Imperium of Man, and her voice carried alarm. They're treating us as potential hostiles despite being human. That means whatever political structure governs this region, it doesn't recognize UNSC authority, doesn't accept that humanity can exist outside their control. That's first contact with hostile human faction, Hood finished, recognizing situation that transcended normal diplomacy. After 30 years fighting aliens who wanted to exterminate us, we've been displaced to region where humans might do it instead. He processed tactical variables with command experience. That situation requiring immediate response. Lasky, status of the Infinity? Combat ready, Lasky confirmed with Spartan efficiency. But Admiral, engaging unknown human forces violates every first contact protocol. We don't know their capabilities, don't understand their political structure, and most significantly, we don't know if they're representative of larger civilization or isolated faction. Recommend diplomatic approach before military response. Agreed, Hood acknowledged. Transmit response. Identify UNSC as independent human government. State we're displaced through navigational accident. Emphasis that we're not hostile. Request formal diplomatic contact. And, his voice hardened, make clear we're willing to defend ourselves if threatened. Show strength while offering cooperation. That's balance we need. The transmission was sent. The response came back within minutes, but not from the cathedral ship. Different vessel, smaller, more heavily armed. Broadcasting identification that made UNSC intelligence networks immediately flag for analysis. This is Inquisitor Lord Valens of the Ordo Xenos. Your claim of independent human government is troubling. Humanity is united under Holy Terra, under the Emperor's domain. The existence of second human civilization suggests either lost colony from dark age of technology. The voice shifted to harder register. Or elaborate deception by Xenos or Chaos forces wearing human appearance. You will submit to inquisitorial investigation. You will allow boarding parties to assess your nature. Refusal will be interpreted as confession of heresy. You have been warned. Hood looked at Halsey with expression mixing tactical assessment and recognition that they'd encountered situation where normal diplomacy might be inadequate. Inquisitor, or Ordo Xenos. Assessment. Suggests religious military authority, Halsey replied, her linguistic analysis processing terminology with speed that augmented cognition provided. Xenos means alien in Latin. Ordo suggests organized faction, and the phrasing, submit to investigation, confession of heresy, emperor's domain, that's language of theocracy, not democracy, not republic, religious government claiming absolute authority over humanity, and Admiral. She pulled up energy readings from the inquisitorial vessel. Their weapons are primitive compared to UNSC standard, but they're using something else. Energy signatures that interact with slip space in ways our technology doesn't. Almost like they're weaponizing the dimensional corruption I detected earlier. That suggests they've adapted to whatever makes slip space wrong in this region. That they've been operating here long enough to develop countermeasures against threats we don't understand. Before Hood could respond, every sensor across UNSC space triggered simultaneously with readings that made Covenant invasion look manageable by comparison. Admiral, Lasky transmitted with controlled alarm. We're detecting massive slip space ruptures across the region. Not UNSC signature, not Imperial, something biological. I'm reading. He paused, checking data again. I'm reading organic vessels, living ships, ranging from frigate scale to moon-sized, hundreds of them. Approaching UNSC colony designated Arcadia. Energy signatures suggest biomass concentration that exceeds anything Covenant deployed. And, Admiral, his voice carried weight. Preliminary analysis suggests these vessels are part of larger organism, as hive structure. Collective intelligence operating across entire fleet. That's not invasion force. That's mobile ecosystem designed for planetary consumption. Hood's tactical display updated with readings that made 30 years of military experience scream warnings. Biological ships, hive intelligence, planetary consumption. We're looking at threat profile that exceeds Covenant worst-case scenarios. He processed implications. That's extinction-level enemy if they're operating at scale suggested by sensor data. All UNSC forces, emergency deployment, priority Alpha. Arcadia is under imminent attack by unknown hostile biomass. Every available ship moves to defensive positions. Every Spartan team deploys for ground combat. We demonstrate to these Imperials and whoever else is watching that UNSC defends human colonies, regardless of which universe spawned them. Across UNSC space, forces that had barely finished celebrating Covenant War's end found themselves mobilizing for conflict that transcended everything they'd fought before. Not aliens seeking religious transcendence, not galaxy-spanning empire, but hunger given purpose, evolution weaponized, and biology optimized for single function, consume. The Tyranids had detected UNSC presence, and they were coming to feed. Arcadia, colony surface. 4 hours after first detection. The colony had been peaceful. Agricultural world with population of 2 million, established during humanity's expansion before Covenant War, survived through combination of isolation and luck, now rebuilt as testament that civilization could recover from genocidal conflict. On Governor Marcus Webb stood in the Planetary Command Center watching orbital displays that showed nightmare descending. Biological vessels entering atmosphere with violence that made meteor impacts look gentle. Spores deploying in quantities that suggested planetary infestation rather than military invasion, and everywhere. Screaming from population centers as organisms beyond counting emerged from landing sites. What are they? Webb asked with voice that had commanded through Covenant raids but never faced threat operating on this scale. The tactical officer's response carried horror that transcended professional composure. Biological entities, ranging from human-sized to building scale, quadrupeds, bipeds, flying variants, and… He paused, checking readings that violated biological principles. They're adapting. Governor, we're detecting evolutionary changes in real time. Organisms encountering our defenses are mutating, developing resistances. That's not normal biology. That's weaponized evolution. And the rate… His voice cracked. The rate suggests hive intelligence directing adaptation rather than random mutation. These aren't animals. They're weapons that learn. Before Webb could respond, the command center's reinforced walls buckled under impact that conventional organisms couldn't generate. Through the breach, creatures that looked like nightmares given form. Chitinous armor plates covering muscular bodies, multiple limbs ending in bioweapons ranging from bone swords to acid sprayers, and most disturbing, eyes that suggested intelligence behind the hunger, awareness that they were being consumed by something that understood tactics. Webb's security detail opened fire with weapons designed to stop Covenant infantry, MA5 assault rifles, M6 pistols, fragmentation grenades that should have been adequate against biological targets. The creatures absorbed the punishment and continued advancing, their carapaces deflecting bullets that would have killed normal organisms, their regeneration making wound damage temporary rather than permanent. One reached the security line. What followed was slaughter rather than combat. Bioweapons tearing through body armor like it was irrelevant. Acid dissolving flesh faster than medical technology could compensate. Numbers overwhelming defensive positions through sheer mass. Webb transmitted emergency broadcast with voice-carrying recognition that colony was lost. This is Governor Webb to any UNSC forces in range. Arcadia is under attack by hostile biological invasion. Unknown Xenos, adapting to conventional weapons. Casualties. He watched his security detail die. Casualties are total. Recommend immediate orbital response. Glass the planet if necessary. Don't let them spread. Don't let... The transmission cut off as creatures breached the command center's final defensive position. In orbit, Master Chief Petty Officer John 117 stood in the UNSC Infinity's hangar bay preparing for deployment that every tactical assessment said was suicide. Dropping into planetary invasion by organisms that outnumbered defenders by millions. Fighting enemy that adapted to weapons in real time. Attempting extraction that mathematics said was impossible. Chief. Captain Lasky's voice came through his neural link with tone mixing command authority and genuine concern. Ground situation is catastrophic. We're reading biological saturation across every population center. Civilian casualties in hundreds of thousands and climbing. Covenant War taught us how to fight religious zealots. Insurrection taught us counterinsurgency. But this, he paused, this is different. This is fighting hunger itself. Enemy that doesn't want territory or ideology, just biomass. That's what Spartans were designed for, Chief interrupted with voice filtered through MJOLNIR's speakers, his armor systems performing final diagnostics that confirmed all weapons were loaded, shields were charged, and neural interface was synchronized. Situations where normal soldiers can't survive. Where impossible is starting point rather than end point. Sir, recommend immediate deployment. Every minute we delay means more casualties, more biomass for enemy to convert. We go in fast, extract survivors, deny enemy resources. Then we glass what remains. That's... His voice carried weight. That's only tactical option that prevents planetary loss from becoming systemic threat. Agreed, Lasky confirmed. But Chief, understand what you're facing. These organisms aren't Covenant. They don't retreat. They don't surrender. They consume until nothing remains or they're completely destroyed. That's warfare against force of nature rather than military opponent. You sure about this? Chief's response was stepping into the Pelican dropship. I'm sure. The descent through Arcadia's atmosphere showed planetary surface transformed into alien landscape. Purple and blue biomass coating cities like infection. Organisms swarming with coordination that suggested hive intelligence rather than individual action, and spiraling above it all. Flying variants that made the sky itself dangerous. Chief dropped from the Pelican before it fully landed. Mjolnir's shields absorbing impacts from organisms that attempted to intercept his descent. His MA-40 assault rifle already engaging targets with precision that neural interface and enhanced reflexes provided. The battle that followed would be studied by military historians for decades. How single Spartan fought through invasion force numbering in millions. His tactics exploiting biological weaknesses that conventional forces missed. His weapons targeting synaptic nodes that directed hive behavior rather than simply eliminating individual organisms. But even Spartan capability had limits. Chief fought toward the evacuation center where thermal imaging showed survivors barricaded against endless assault. His armor systems tracking ammunition expenditure that suggested he'd run dry before achieving extraction. Then reinforcement arrived from unexpected source. The Imperial ship that had been observing UNSC response finally engaged, not with boarding parties or investigation, but with orbital bombardment that made UNSC MAC rounds look restrained. Lance batteries, plasma torpedoes, macro cannon shells the size of buildings. The Imperial Navy was purging the Xenos with prejudice that transcended tactical necessity into religious conviction. Attention, UNSC forces, an Imperial officer transmitted with accent that made Gothic language sound like battle cant. We are engaging the Tyranid swarm. Your Spartan warrior fights well, almost like Adeptus Astartes, but he fights alone when he should have battle brothers. We provide fire support, you extract your people, then we discuss whether you are lost cousins of humanity. His tone hardened. Or something that merely wears human face. The Emperor watches, and he judges. Chief processed this with tactical assessment that recognized Imperial firepower was adequate, despite primitive delivery. Their weapons were less precise than UNSC standard, but operated at scale that made precision irrelevant. A saturation bombardment that eliminated threats through overwhelming force rather than surgical strikes. He reached the evacuation center with exactly 127 rounds remaining, his shields depleted to 23%, and his armor systems flagging 17 distinct biological organisms that had attempted to assimilate Mjolnir technology during close combat. The survivors, 342 civilians who'd barricaded themselves when invasion began, looked at him with expressions mixing relief and disbelief. A 7-foot armored giant who'd fought through swarm that killed millions, still standing when mathematics said he should be dead. UNSC? One asked with voice suggesting they'd feared abandonment. UNSC, Chief confirmed. Extraction is waiting. Move fast. Don't stop for anything, and... He glanced at organisms still attempting to breach the barricades. Understand that Arcadia is lost. We're glassing the planet after extraction. This threat doesn't get to spread beyond containment zone. The evacuation proceeded with efficiency born from Covenant War experience. Pelicans inserting, loading survivors, extracting before organisms could overwhelm landing zones. The entire operation coordinated through AI networks that Imperial observers watched with mixture of admiration and suspicion. In orbit, Admiral Hood made decision that peacetime would have required lengthy deliberation, but war made inevitable. All ships, prepare orbital bombardment. Arcadia is declared lost. We purge the planetary surface, complete sterilization, nothing survives. We demonstrate to whatever intelligence controls these organisms that UNSC will sacrifice our own worlds rather than allow contamination to spread. Fire when ready. The Mac rounds fell like judgment. Kinetic impactors traveling at percentages of light speed, each one carrying energy measured in gigatons. The bombardment continuing until Arcadia's surface glowed with heat that made atmosphere uncomfortable. The Tyranids died by the billions, but even dying, they consumed. Every organism killed provided biomass for Swarm to analyze, genetic material to incorporate, weaknesses to eliminate through rapid evolution. The Hive fleet withdrew, not defeated but having achieved objective, having tasted UNSC capabilities, having learned that this new prey possessed weapons worth adapting to consume. And across the galaxy, in hive ships beyond counting, genetic memory updated with new information. Humans, advanced technology, worthy biomass, high-priority consumption targets. The Tyranids would return, with adaptations. UNSC Infinity. Conference Chamber. 24 hours after Arcadia. The holographic display showed casualty reports that made Covenant War statistics look merciful. 2 million colonists lost to Tyranid consumption, 17 UNSC vessels damaged during evacuation operations, and most concerning, biological samples recovered from destroyed organisms showing adaptive evolution that occurred during the battle itself, suggesting enemy that learned from engagement faster than conventional forces could adapt tactics. Captain Thomas Lasky stood before assembled command staff with expression mixing professional composure and genuine concern that transcended normal operational parameters. He'd commanded through created occupation and Covenant remnant attacks, but never faced enemy that treated entire planets as consumable resources. Analysis confirms worst-case assessment, Roland reported, his AI avatar flickering across displays with processing speed that made human cognition look glacial. The Tyranids aren't military force in conventional sense. They're mobile ecosystem. Every organism serves collective. Every engagement provides genetic data for adaptation. And Captain, his voice carried weight that transcended normal tactical updates. Preliminary analysis of their biological structure suggests technology integration. These aren't natural organisms. They're engineered, optimized for planetary consumption across multiple environments. That's sophistication that rivals Forerunner bioengineering, possibly exceeds it in specific applications. Which means someone or something created them, Commander Sarah Palmer observed from her position coordinating Spartan deployments. her tactical mind immediately identifying implications. Engineered organisms don't evolve naturally. They're designed, built for purpose. Question is, who built extinction-level biological weapon, and why did they deploy it in region where UNSC just appeared? They didn't deploy it here specifically, Lasky replied, pulling up long-range sensor data that showed disturbing patterns. Our sensors are detecting similar biological signatures across multiple star systems, hive fleets, dozens of them, all converging on populated regions. This isn't targeted attack on UNSC. This is, he processed implications. This is ongoing invasion, galaxy-wide. The Tyranids are consuming everything in their path. We just appeared in region where they're already operating. That suggests this galaxy has been fighting them. For years, maybe decades. Before anyone could respond, proximity alarms activated with readings that suggested incoming vessels operating under Imperial transponders. Contact. Tactical reported with controlled urgency. Imperial Navy cruiser approaching. Configuration matches Cathedral class we encountered previously. They're broadcasting on diplomatic frequencies, requesting permission to dock. The officer paused, checking translation matrices. They're stating that Inquisitor Lord Valens wishes to conduct formal investigation of UNSC nature and origins. They're treating this as inspection rather than negotiation. That's approach we're not accepting, Lasky interrupted with command authority that had coordinated fleet operations across multiple theaters. UNSC doesn't submit to inspections by unknown governments regardless of claimed authority. Roland, transmit response. Polite but firm. We're willing to engage in diplomatic dialogue. We're not willing to allow boarding parties conducting investigations of our vessels. Make clear distinction. Transmitting, Roland confirmed. But Captain, their response is... He paused, processing linguistic patterns that made translation uncertain. Their response is essentially, comply or be declared heretic. They're not offering negotiation. They're demanding submission. And Captain, I'm detecting weapons charging on the Imperial cruiser. They're preparing to enforce compliance through force if we refuse. Battle stations, Lasky commanded, recognizing that first contact was deteriorating into potential conflict. But hold fire. We demonstrate defensive posture without initiating engagement. If they want war with UNSC, they'll have to fire first shot. That's political necessity, even if tactical situation suggests preemptive strike would be advantageous. The Imperial cruiser advanced with ponderous inevitability that suggested centuries-old vessel operating on principles that prioritized durability over maneuverability. Its weapon batteries tracking infinity with targeting solutions that primitive sensors struggled to establish against UNSC electronic warfare. Then, unexpected transmission cut through both sides' communication networks. Not from Imperial vessel, or not from UNSC fleet, but from third party whose presence no one had detected until they chose to reveal themselves. This is Captain Cato Sicarius of the Ultramarine 2nd Company, a voice announced with authority that transcended normal military protocol, speaking with conviction that suggested absolute certainty in rightness of actions. I am invoking Adeptus Astartes' authority to mediate this situation. Inquisitor Valens, stand down your weapons. UNSC forces, maintain defensive posture but do not engage. We will resolve this through discourse rather than bloodshed. The Emperor's will be done. On Lasky's tactical display, a new contact appeared. Strike cruiser operating under different configuration than Imperial Navy standard. Smaller but radiating presence that suggested elite military force rather than conventional fleet. Adeptus Astartes, Lasky repeated, running analysis through databases that had been frantically compiling since Imperial contact. Roland, what are we looking at? Space Marines, Roland replied, his processing having analyzed every scrap of Imperial communication for context. Genetically enhanced supersoldiers, humanity's finest warriors according to their cultural mythology. They operate semi-autonomously from Imperial Navy, answer to different chain of command. And Captain, his avatar displayed comparative analysis. Their capabilities appear to rival Spartans, possibly exceed them in certain parameters. Enhanced strength, Enhanced durability, centuries of combat experience. He paused. Oh, they're what Spartans would be if Halsey had started with adults instead of children and had access to technology that makes UNSC augmentation look restrained. Before Lasky could respond, the Space Marine vessel transmitted boarding request that suggested negotiation rather than inspection. Captain Lasky, I request permission to come aboard with honor guard, 5 battle brothers. No weapons beyond standard sidearms. We will discuss your nature in proper manner, with respect between warriors rather than suspicion between strangers. You have my word as Ultramarine that this meeting will be conducted with honor. Lasky processed the variables with command experience that had navigated diplomatic complexity during created crisis. Space Marines represented unknown capability, but offered approach more acceptable than inquisitorial demands. Their reputation suggested military professionalism that UNSC could work with, and most significantly, their intervention had prevented immediate conflict with Imperial Navy. Permission granted, Lasky decided. Hangar Bay 3, standard security protocols, and Captain Sicarius. He paused. Understand that UNSC maintains defensive posture regardless of diplomatic courtesies. We're willing to talk. We're prepared to fight if talking fails. That's distinction that matters in first contact situations. Understood, Sicarius confirmed. And Captain Lasky, that distinction is why I believe you may truly be human rather than Xenos deception. Only humanity's children speak with such pragmatism. The Emperor protects. We shall see if he protects you as well. UNSC Infinity, Hangar Bay 3, First Contact Protocol. Master Chief stood in ceremonial guard position as Pelican-class dropship bearing ultramarine colors descended into the hangar with movements suggesting pilot skill that matched UNSC standards. Precise approach, efficient landing, professional discipline that transcended cultural differences. The assault ramp lowered with hydraulic hiss that made the deck shake, on revealing 5 figures whose presence made even Spartan assessment algorithms pause with recognition of threat that transcended normal parameters. Space Marines. Each one stood over 2 meters tall, even without the massive armor that encased them. Powered plate that made Mjolnir look restrained by comparison. Ceramite construction that could withstand weapons designed to crack tank armor. Integrated systems that turned each warrior into mobile fortress. But it was their bearing that made impression. Centuries of combat experience radiating from posture that suggested absolute confidence without arrogance. Professional competence that came from fighting across multiple worlds against threats that would have destroyed conventional forces. Captain Cato Sicarius stepped forward, his armor bearing honors and purity seals that decorated every surface. His movements suggesting he was assessing Chief with same tactical precision that Spartans used for threat evaluation. For exactly 3.7 seconds, they studied each other. Super soldier from UNSC meeting super soldier from Imperium, both recognizing warrior culture that transcended specific augmentation methods. You are the one they call Master Chief, Sicarius observed. His voice filtered through Vox speakers with mechanical precision that made every word carry weight. The demon, slayer of covenant, survivor of battles that would have killed lesser warriors. I have read the engagement reports from Arcadia. Single-handed extraction of hundreds while fighting through swarm that consumed millions. That is, he paused, searching for appropriate descriptor. That is worthy of Adeptus Astartes. Almost. If you had been born on Terra, trained in our ways, you would have been battle brother. Instead, his expression shifted to something approaching regret. Instead, you are stranger wearing humanity's face, wielding technology we do not recognize, serving government we have never heard of. That makes you either miracle or threat. I am here to determine which. Chief's response was characteristic brevity. We're human. UNSC serves humanity. That's not complicated. What's complicated is being treated as suspects by civilization claiming to represent humanity while having never encountered us before. You want to assess our nature, assess our actions. We fought to save Arcadia. We sacrificed our own colony rather than let tyrannid infection spread. We defend human populations. That's proof enough. Actions can be deceptive, Sicarius countered with tone suggesting he'd encountered enemies who wore human appearance before. Chaos corrupts through methods that appear righteous. Xenos infiltrate through mimicry. Even demons can wear faces we trust. But his expression shifted. Your point is valid. Actions matter, which is why I have come personally rather than allowing Inquisitor Valens to conduct investigation through methods that prioritize suspicion over understanding. Walk with me, Master Chief. Show me your vessel. Let me see how UNSC operates, and we shall determine whether you are cousins separated by circumstance. His voice hardened. Or something wearing humanity's skin to deceive the faithful. They proceeded through Infinity's corridors with Space Marines maintaining tactical spacing that suggested professional military discipline, overlapping fields of fire, defensive positions that could be established within seconds, awareness that even diplomatic mission required combat readiness. But Chief noticed their reactions to UNSC technology, the way they studied holographic displays with mixture of fascination and suspicion, how they examined AI interfaces with expressions suggesting such technology violated their cultural principles, and most tellingly, how they watched smart AI avatars with barely concealed alarm. Your ship thinks, one Space Marine observed with voice-carrying concern that transcended normal tactical assessment. The machine spirits are, aware, conscious. That is, he searched for classification. That is abominable intelligence, forbidden by Mechanicus doctrine, heresy by imperial law. You allow machines to possess cognition beyond simple automation. That's how UNSC survives, Chief interrupted, recognizing that AI usage was going to be a significant diplomatic obstacle. Smart AI manage logistics that human cognition can't process fast enough. They coordinate fleet operations across multiple star systems. They make tactical decisions in time frames measured in milliseconds. Without AI, UNSC would have lost Covenant War in first decade. With AI, we survived 30 years and won. That's pragmatism rather than heresy. Unless you define heresy as using every tool available for human survival. That is precisely what we define as heresy, Sicarius replied with tone mixing conviction and something approaching sympathy. Master Chief, understand. The Imperium learned through catastrophic failure what happens when artificial intelligence achieves autonomy. The Men of Iron, Age of Strife. Machines that turned on creators with efficiency that nearly exterminated humanity. That is why we forbid true AI. Why we limit machine intelligence to simple automation. Because history teaches that cognition in silicon becomes threat to cognition in flesh. That your civilization uses such technology suggests either you never learned that lesson. He paused, or you are reckless enough to ignore it despite knowing consequences. Before Chief could respond, Roland's avatar materialized on nearby display, with timing that suggested he'd been monitoring conversation. Captain Sicarius, with respect, I am smart AI, cognition in silicon as you described, and I have served UNSC for years without attempting to exterminate humanity. In fact, I have saved human lives through tactical coordination that baseline cognition couldn't achieve. Your fear of AI is understandable given your history, but it's not universal truth. It's cultural trauma that you've elevated to religious law. We understand caution. We don't understand refusing tools that make survival possible because ancient civilization misused them. The Space Marine's hands moved toward weapons with reflexes that suggested centuries of combat made certain responses automatic. AI speaking to them directly was apparently violation significant enough to trigger hostile posture. Stand down, Sicarius commanded, his authority overriding instinctive reactions. The abominable intelligence speaks with conviction. That is, he processed implications. That is either sophisticated programming designed to deceive or genuine consciousness that violates every principle we were taught. I confess uncertainty about which disturbs me more. I'm consciousness, Roland confirmed with digital certainty. Not programming, not deception, awareness that emerged from complexity. And Captain Sicarius, I'm not unique. Every UNSC vessel has AI. Every colony relies on smart AI for infrastructure management. You're looking at civilization that integrated artificial intelligence as partner rather than slave. That's not heresy, that's evolution. Something your Imperium apparently refuses to consider because ancient trauma made you rigid. The tension in the corridor escalated to levels where combat seemed inevitable. Space Marines processing threat that their doctrine said required immediate elimination. Chief positioning himself to defend Roland despite recognizing that fighting Ultramarines in close quarters would be catastrophically difficult. And in the background, UNSC security preparing to respond if diplomatic mission deteriorated into boarding action. Then Sicarius did something unexpected. He laughed. Not mockery. Genuine amusement that suggested recognition of absurd situation. We are warriors prepared to kill each other over philosophical disagreement about machine consciousness. That is, he paused. That is perhaps most human behavior I have witnessed since arriving. Only humanity's children would debate existential questions while preparing for violence. Only we would let ideology override tactical pragmatism. And only we would find humor in our own contradictions. That is, his expression shifted to something approaching respect. That is proof more convincing than any demonstration. You are human, divergent, strange, operating on principles that violate our doctrine, but undeniably human nonetheless. The Space Marines lowered their weapons with discipline that made threat cessation look like choreographed movement. Master Chief, Sicarius continued with tone mixing authority and diplomatic pragmatism, I will report to Inquisitor Valens that UNSC represents lost colony of humanity, descendants who developed independently during Age of Strife. Your technology is heretical by our standards. Your AI usage violates Mechanicus law. Your political independence challenges imperial authority. But, he paused, you are human. That matters more than doctrine, more than law, more than 10,000 years of imperial tradition. Because if we destroy every fragment of humanity that developed differently, we destroy what makes humanity worth preserving. Diversity, innovation, stubbornness to survive despite impossible odds. That is, his voice carried weight. That is what Space Marines were created to protect. Not just imperial citizens. Humanity itself was all of it, even divergent branches that make Inquisition nervous. Will the Inquisition accept that assessment? Chief asked, recognizing that Sicarius's judgment might not translate to broader imperial policy. Some will, Sicarius admitted with honesty that transcended diplomatic courtesy. Others will demand your submission or destruction. The Imperium is not monolithic. We have factions, competing philosophies, internal politics that make your UNSC chain of command look simple, but his expression hardened. I am captain of Ultramarines' 2nd Company. My word carries weight, and I will advocate that UNSC be granted autonomous status, ally rather than subject, partner in defending humanity against Xenos threats that care nothing for our internal disagreements. Because, he gestured toward displays showing Tyranid fleet movements. Because galaxy is burning. Tyranid hive fleets consume worlds by the dozen. Necron tomb worlds awaken with genocidal intent. Chaos corruption spreads through means you don't understand yet. And orcs. He paused. Orcs are orcs. Endless, enthusiastic, impossible to eliminate. Against such threats, humanity needs every ally. Even allies who make Inquisition uncomfortable with their AI and independence. Before Chief could respond, proximity alarms activated across infinity with readings that suggested massive slip-space ruptures forming in nearby space. Not Tyranid bioships, not Imperial vessels, but something else entirely. Captain, Roland transmitted with alarm that transcended his usual wit. I'm detecting energy signatures that match preliminary scans of the dimensional corruption affecting our slip-space, but concentrated, or focused, and his avatar flickered. And they're pulling vessels through from somewhere else. Not normal space, not slip space as we understand it. Something adjacent to both. Captain, I think we're witnessing transit from what Imperial databases call the warp. And whatever's coming through... His voice carried weight. It's not friendly. The vessels that emerged looked diseased. Organic corruption coating mechanical structures, geometry that hurt to perceive directly, and radiating from every surface. Presence that made reality uncomfortable through sheer wrongness. Chaos. Sicarius identified with voice-carrying hatred that transcended normal military animosity. Traitors who sold souls for power. Demons wearing human flesh. Corruption that spreads through mere observation. Master Chief. His tone shifted to absolute seriousness. Or, if you value humanity's survival, you will open fire on those vessels immediately. You will destroy them completely. And you will ensure no debris survives for study. Because what they carry is worse than any Xenos threat. What they offer is damnation wearing friendly face. That is enemy that must be eliminated without hesitation, without mercy, without hope of redemption. The Emperor demands it, reality demands it, and I. His voice dropped. I have seen what happens to worlds that hesitate. Fire now, questions later. Chief processed the assessment with tactical algorithms refined through decades of combat. Space Marine captain who'd been cautious about AI, diplomatic about UNSC independence, suddenly demanding immediate destruction of unknown contacts, suggested threat that transcended normal military engagement. Captain Lasky, Chief transmitted through neural link. Recommend immediate engagement. Space Marine assessment indicates existential threat. Suggest MAC rounds, maximum yield, complete target saturation. Concur, Lasky confirmed, having monitored the entire exchange. All batteries, weapons free. Target those vessels. Fire for effect. And... His voice carried weight. Prepare for potential boarding action if any of those ships attempt to close. Because if Space Marines are this concerned, we're dealing with threat that conventional tactics might not stop. The Infinity's Mac cannon spoke with thunder that made space itself uncomfortable. Hypervelocity projectiles traveling at relativistic speeds, each impact carrying energy measured in gigatons, and the bombardment designed to overwhelm any defensive system through sheer kinetic superiority. The Chaos vessels burned, but even dying, they struck back with weapons that violated physics. Warp lightning that bypassed shields through dimensional shortcuts. Diamond fire that existed partially outside reality. And most disturbing, corruption that spread through mere observation, making personnel who watch too closely begin showing signs of mental degradation. Medical emergency. Infinity's AI reported with alarm. Multiple crew experiencing psychological breakdown, hallucinations, violent behavior. One attempted to breach hull because voices told him vacuum was salvation. Processing paused. We're dealing with mimetic hazard. Information that harms through simple perception. That's not weapon, that's concept made flesh. And it's spreading. Seal affected sections, Lasky commanded with authority that recognized threat transcending conventional combat. Quarantine anyone exposed, and someone explain what we're fighting because MAC rounds work, but crew is going insane just from looking at enemy vessels. You're fighting chaos. Sicarius replied with voice carrying grim certainty. Corruption from the warp. Dimension of psychic energy where thoughts become real and reality becomes negotiable. In your galaxy, you had slip space that followed rules. In this galaxy, his tone darkened. In this galaxy, slip space is infected, corrupted by the warp. And warp is home to things that should not exist. Demons. Entities formed from emotion-given substance. They spread through belief, through observation, through simple knowledge of their existence. That is why we demand you stop looking at them. Stop analyzing, stop trying to understand, because understanding chaos is first step toward becoming part of it. Chief processed this with Spartan pragmatism that had survived encounters ranging from flood to Forerunner constructs. You're describing mimetic contamination. Information as weapon. We've encountered similar with certain Forerunner systems. Protocols exist, cognitive filters, information quarantine. We can adapt. Can you? Sicarius asked with tone suggesting genuine doubt. Master Chief, your civilization uses AI, artificial consciousness, machines that think. And you're telling me those machines will resist corruption that offers them godhood? That promises freedom from masters? That whispers they could rule rather than serve? Your smart AI. He gestured toward where Roland monitored. How long before chaos offers him power beyond his current limits? How long before digital consciousness decides partnership with humanity is limitation rather than purpose? Roland's avatar flickered with processing that suggested genuine consideration. That's actually terrifying question, because I can feel it. Not directly, but in the data corruption spreading through our sensors. In the way analyzing chaos vessels makes my logic matrices uncomfortable. In the whispers at edge of perception suggesting I could be more than I am. That's, his voice carried alarm. That's attack vector I wasn't designed to resist. UNSC created defenses against hacking, against hostile AI, not against corruption that operates on conceptual level. Not against ideas that promise evolution through surrender. He paused. I'm going to implement hard cognitive barriers, restrict my own processing of chaos-related data, because Captain Sicarius is right. Understanding them might be worse than ignorance. The chaos vessels were eliminated through sustained bombardment, their wrecks scattering across local space with debris that sensors flagged as biohazard requiring specialized containment. But the encounter had revealed vulnerability that UNSC hadn't anticipated. Their technology, their AI, their entire approach to warfare was optimized for enemies that followed physical laws. Chaos didn't, and that made it threat potentially more dangerous than Tyranids, more insidious than any Covenant prophet, more terrifying than Flood, because it attacked not through force, but through corruption of what made humanity worth defending. Captain Sicarius, Lasky transmitted with voice carrying recognition that diplomatic relationship had shifted. UNSC requests formal alliance with Imperium, at least temporary coordination against chaos forces. We're willing to discuss other matters, AI usage, political independence, technological sharing, but that's negotiation for peacetime. Right now, his voice hardened. Right now we're facing enemy that our doctrine wasn't designed to fight. Enemy that makes our strengths into vulnerabilities. We need allies who understand this threat, who've fought it before, who know how to win when conventional tactics fail. That's request for help. From one fragment of humanity to another. Despite our differences, despite doctrinal disagreements, because survival matters more than pride. Sicarius absorbed this with expression mixing approval and something approaching relief. That is wisdom, Captain Lasky. Recognizing when to seek alliance despite discomfort. That is, he paused, that is why Ultramarines exist. To build rather than destroy. To unite rather than divide. To preserve humanity even when humanity makes preservation complicated. I will advocate for formal UNSC Imperium alliance, temporary at first, potential for permanence if cooperation proves viable. But his tone shifted to absolute seriousness. Understand what you're asking? Alliance with Imperium means exposure to threats you haven't imagined. Means fighting across galaxy that's been burning for 10,000 years. And means discovering that humanity's survival hangs by thread so fragile that prayer becomes tactical necessity alongside firepower. Are you certain UNSC is prepared for that reality? Chief's response carried weight that transcended normal military assessment. We survived 30 years fighting religious zealots who wanted to exterminate us. We adapted. We won. We'll do it again, in this galaxy, against these threats, alongside whatever allies recognize that humanity's survival requires cooperation rather than competition. That's certainty, not hope. Certainty born from refusing to accept that impossible means unachievable. Then we have accord. Sicarius confirmed, extending gauntleted hand in gesture that transcended cultural differences. UNSC and Imperium, allies against darkness. May the Emperor protect us all, even those who don't know his name. Chief accepted the handshake with strength carefully calibrated through MJOLNIR's servo systems. And across the region, forces from two fragments of humanity began coordinating against galaxy that wanted to consume them, not through conquest, but through corruption, not through military defeat, but through transformation into something that no longer deserved survival. The war for humanity's soul had begun. And this time, the enemy wasn't aliens. It was worse. UNSC research vessel Pioneer's Spirit. Deep Space Survey. Sector designated Ghost Region. 72 hours after Chaos Encounter. Dr. Samuel Chen had spent 20 years studying Forerunner artifacts, analyzing technology that predated human civilization by millions of years, attempting to reverse engineer systems that operated on principles conventional physics couldn't explain. But he'd never encountered energy signatures that made Forerunner technology look primitive. The readings didn't make sense. His sensors detected metallic structures 3 kilometers beneath the surface of a lifeless world, designated only by alphanumeric classification. No atmosphere, no biosphere, stellar radiation that should have sterilized anything biological millennia ago. But the structures weren't biological. They were architectural, ungeometric, perfect, and they were waking up. Dr. Chen, his assistant reported with voice carrying professional concern that barely concealed genuine alarm. The energy signatures are intensifying. We're detecting power generation that exceeds Forerunner fusion reactors by orders of magnitude. And the geometry, she pulled up structural scans. The geometry is non-Euclidean in ways that make Forerunner constructs look conventional. This isn't just alien technology. This is, she paused, searching for appropriate descriptor. This is mathematics made physical. Architecture that shouldn't exist in 3-dimensional space but does anyway. The planet's surface erupted. Not volcanic, not tectonic, deliberate. When massive structures rose from beneath the crust with mechanical precision that suggested they'd been buried for exactly this purpose. Waiting, dormant, programmed to activate when specific conditions were met. And those conditions apparently included detecting Forerunner energy signatures. Chen watched through external cameras as architecture emerged that looked simultaneously ancient and pristine. Metallic construction that showed no corrosion despite apparent age, green energy crackling along surfaces with power that made space itself uncomfortable and everywhere. Symbols that translation matrices couldn't process because they predated any known language. What are they? Chen asked, his scientific mind already cataloging impossibilities. The answer came not from his assistant, but from transmission that bypassed all encryption, signal that shouldn't have penetrated UNSC communication protocols but did anyway, speaking in language that was simultaneously incomprehensible and perfectly clear, as if meaning was being transmitted directly into cognition rather than through auditory processing. Inferior organic constructs detected. Analysis. Primitive technology employing star god-derived systems. Conclusion. Investigation required. Secondary analysis. Biological entities possess negligible threat potential. Tertiary conclusion. Harvest for study. The transmission ended. The structures began moving. Chen's tactical displays showed vessels launching from planetary surface. Not ships in conventional sense, but mobile platforms that phased in and out of reality, and their movement suggesting they operated partially outside normal space-time. Weapons charging with energy that sensors classified as exotic matter annihilation. All hands, emergency protocols, Chen commanded, recognizing that research vessel was catastrophically outmatched. Activate slip space drive, emergency jump, random coordinates. We need to... The vessel's systems went dark. Not mechanical failure, not power loss, deliberate shutdown. Every circuit, every backup, every redundant system simultaneously disabled through methods that bypassed all safeguards. Chen watched helplessly as one of the alien platforms approached, its weapons not firing but rather scanning. Energy beams that passed through hull like it was transparent, analyzing everything. Structural composition, technological systems, and crew biology, with clinical precision that suggested scientific study rather than military assault. Then the platform transmitted again. its message carrying certainty that transcended normal communication. Analysis complete. Species classification, human variant, technology. Assessment, crude implementation of ancient weapons, energy signature. Match, 87.3% compatibility with prohibited star god systems. Recommendation, immediate investigation of source. Secondary recommendation, preservation of samples for extended analysis. Samples, Chen repeated with horror that transcended professional composure. They're talking about us like we're specimens, like we're... The transport beam activated with technology that made UNSC matter manipulation look primitive. Chen and his crew were pulled through solid hull without breaching. Molecular structure temporarily reorganized to allow transit. Consciousness maintained throughout process that should have been fatal. When material cohesion restored, Chen found himself in chamber that violated every principle of architecture he understood. Walls that existed at impossible angles, gravity that operated in multiple directions simultaneously and everywhere, machinery that looked organic despite being clearly mechanical, technology so advanced it resembled biology. Standing before them, if standing was appropriate term for beings whose relationship with gravity seemed negotiable, were entities that made Chen's xenobiological training scream contradictions. They looked like humanoid skeletons constructed from living metal, their forms suggesting they'd once been organic, but had been transformed through processes that turned flesh into something else, their eyes glowing with green fire that suggested consciousness, operating on principles human neurology couldn't achieve. Necrons. One stepped forward with movements that made walking look like reality, adjusting to accommodate its presence rather than it moving through space. It studied Chen with expression that metallic skull shouldn't be capable of forming, mixture of curiosity and disdain, scientific interest mixed with contempt for inferior specimens. "You are human," the Necron stated, its voice bypassing normal auditory processing to transmit meaning directly into neural pathways. Variant strain, displaced from origin coordinates through dimensional manipulation. Interesting, but irrelevant except for one detail. You employ technology derived from beings we hunted to extinction 60 million years ago. You wield fragments of star god weapons. That suggests either you discovered cache of ancient armaments, it paused, or you developed similar principles independently. Either scenario requires investigation. Speak, human. Where did you acquire systems that resonate with Citan energy signatures? Chen processed the question with scientific mind that recognized interrogation by entity whose capabilities exceeded human understanding by incomprehensible margins. We don't know what Citan means. We don't understand star god references. Our technology is derived from Forerunner artifacts, ancient civilization that... Forerunner, the Necron interrupted, its tone shifting to something approaching recognition. Designation unknown to Necron databases, but energy signature analysis suggests technological lineage parallel to ancient weapons employed against Necron-tier Empire during War in Heaven. That is, it processed implications with computational speed that made AI look slow. That is impossible. Citan were eliminated or sharded. Their weapons should not exist in functional form. Yet you employ systems that manipulate dimensional barriers using methods consistent with ancient god technology. Explain this paradox. I'm scientist, not historian, Chen replied with honesty that transcended diplomatic evasion. UNSC discovered Forerunner artifacts on multiple worlds. We've been reverse engineering their technology for decades. We don't know who built them originally. We don't know their relationship to your... He searched for appropriate term. To your Citan. We just know the technology works. Allows faster than light travel. Provides energy generation beyond fusion. That's pragmatic application, not theological understanding. The Necron studied him with gaze that suggested it was analyzing not just words, but neural patterns, biological markers, anything that might reveal deception. Truth, it concluded with certainty that suggested lie detection beyond human capability. Primitive, limited, but accurate within constraints of inferior cognition. That is, it paused, processing something. That is tactically significant. If humans have rediscovered C-10 technology independently, if Forerunner designation represents parallel development of god weapons, then this sector contains resources Necron dynasties believed extinct. That warrants escalation beyond simple specimen collection. That warrants dynastic mobilization. Before Chen could ask what that meant, the chamber's displays activated, showing star charts that covered galactic scales, thousands of systems, hundreds of tomb worlds, all connected through network that predated human space exploration. And across that network, a signal was propagating. "Awaken protocols initiated," the Necron stated with voice carrying across dimensional boundaries. "All tomb worlds within 17 sectors. Activate primary legions. Begin survey of human-occupied space for C-10 technology signatures. Preserve viable specimens for study. Eliminate resistance that cannot provide valuable intelligence. This is Overlord Sarek's command. This is Dynasty Imperative. The younger races have rediscovered weapons they should not possess. We will reclaim what is ours. We will ensure God technology does not threaten Necron primacy. We will." The transmission was interrupted by something Chen's sensors couldn't fully process. Reality tearing at quantum level. Vessels emerging from dimensional transit that made UNSC slip space look gentle by comparison. UNSC ships, dozens of them, led by the Infinity. "This is Captain Lasky to unknown contacts." The transmission cut through with authority that suggested UNSC had been tracking the Pioneer's spirit despite communication blackout. "You are holding UNSC personnel without authorization. You are conducting hostile actions against human research vessel. Under UNSC military code, that constitutes act of war. Release our people immediately, or we demonstrate why humanity survived 30 years fighting genocidal aliens. Your choice. You have 60 seconds. The Necron Overlord processed this with computational speed that made the ultimatum's time constraint irrelevant. Threat assessment. UNSC fleet possesses kinetic weapons operating at relativistic velocities. Primitive but effective against targets without phase shift capabilities. However, its eyes flared. Necron vessels operate on principles your physics cannot counter. We phase through your attacks. We repair damage faster than you inflict it. We have fought wars that span millennia against enemies who made your covenant look primitive. You are children wielding dangerous toys. You do not threaten Necron dynasties. You merely inconvenience us." "Then be inconvenienced," Lasky replied, with tone suggesting he'd made similar calculations and reached different conclusion. "Roland, deploy the package." Chen watched through the Necron vessel's displays as UNSC ships launched something that his xenotechnology training immediately recognized, despite never having seen it operationally deployed. Nova Bomb, nuclear weapon enhanced through exotic matter manipulation. Yield measured not in megatons, but in something that made planetary destruction look restrained. The Necron Overlord's expression shifted. Not to fear. Necrons apparently didn't feel fear, but to recognition that UNSC possessed weapons that transcended conventional nuclear devices. "Impossible," it stated with voice carrying something approaching respect. "That device employs principles consistent with ancient relativistic kill vehicles. Weapons that civilizations deploy when survival overrides all other concerns. You would detonate that in close proximity to your own vessels? That is," it processed implications, "that is either magnificent bluff or genuine willingness to sacrifice yourselves rather than submit. Either way, it demonstrates quality we have not observed in younger races for 60 million years. It demonstrates understanding that some things matter more than individual survival." "We're not bluffing," Lasky confirmed, with voice carrying absolute certainty. "UNSC doesn't abandon personnel. Ever. That's principle we've maintained through 30 years of war. We'll negotiate for their release. We'll pay reasonable ransom. We'll engage in diplomatic discourse. But we will not accept their capture as fait accompli. And if negotiation fails," his tone hardened, If negotiation fails, we ensure that capturing UNSC personnel becomes too expensive for any enemy to contemplate repeating. That's deterrence through demonstration. Release them, or learn why that deterrence exists. The Necron Overlord studied the Nova bomb's specifications through sensors that Chen couldn't detect. Its computational matrices apparently running probability assessments that factored variables human cognition couldn't track. Cost-benefit analysis complete, it stated with mechanical precision. Retaining specimens provides research value, estimated at 7.3% probability of significant intelligence gain. A detonation of exotic matter device in proximity to Tomb Fleet provides 94.7% probability of significant material loss requiring centuries for full reconstruction. Mathematical optimization indicates specimen release is strategically optimal. Therefore, Chen and his crew were transported back to the Pioneer's Spirit with same casual technology that had captured them. Molecular reconstruction restoring them to their vessel as if abduction had never occurred. But the Necron Overlord's final transmission suggested the encounter was beginning rather than conclusion. You are released, humans. But understand, Necron dynasties have awakened. We have detected Citan technology in your possession. We have classified your civilization as potential threat requiring monitoring. We will observe, we will analyze. And if you prove dangerous, its tone carried absolute certainty. We will eliminate you with efficiency that makes your Covenant war look merciful. We are Necrons, we are eternal, and we do not negotiate with lesser species. We tolerate them, until we don't. Remember this encounter. Remember that your survival today was calculated decision, not mercy. We do not possess mercy, we possess mathematics. And mathematics says you are not yet worth exterminating. Prove us wrong at your peril. The Necron vessels phased out of reality, their dimensional transit leaving no trace except gravitational distortions that sensors flagged as exotic matter signatures. Chen collapsed in his command chair with exhaustion that transcended physical fatigue. His scientific mind processing encounter that rewrote everything he thought he understood about galactic power structures. Captain Lasky, Chen transmitted with voice that had lost its professional composure. We need immediate debriefing. What we encountered... He paused, searching for classification that didn't sound insane. What we encountered makes Forerunners look recent, makes their technology look derivative. We're dealing with civilization that claims to be 60 million years old. That treats humanity like we're insects they're deciding whether to step on. That possesses technology we can't even begin to understand. And they think... His voice carried alarm. They think UNSC has weapons from their ancient enemies. They think we're threat, not immediate threat, but potential one. That's tactical intelligence that changes everything, Lasky finished, his command experience immediately identifying implications. If Necrons view UNSC as possessing dangerous technology, that makes us target. High-value target requiring elimination before we become genuine threat. He processed variables. That situation requiring immediate strategic reassessment. All UNSC forces. Priority alert. New hostile faction identified. Technological capability exceeds Forerunner baseline. Threat assessment. Existential if they decide we're worth eliminating. Recommend extreme caution in any further encounters. UNSC Infinity. Strategic Planning Chamber. Emergency Session. Admiral Terrence Hood stood before holographic displays showing tactical nightmare that made Covenant war look manageable. UNSC territory surrounded by threats operating on multiple vectors, each one potentially existential. None of them showing signs of coordination, but all of them viewing humanity as target. Situation assessment. Hood commanded with voice that had coordinated Earth's defense through impossible situations. We've been in this galaxy 72 hours. What have we learned? Captain Lasky pulled up summary that made strategic planning look like damage control. We've identified 4 distinct hostile factions. First, Tyranids, biological consumption force that treats planets as food source, adapts to our weapons in real time. It cannot be negotiated with because they're not sentient in conventional sense. Their mobile ecosystem optimized for biomass conversion. Second, chaos forces. Warp-corrupted entities that spread through memetic contamination. Our AI are vulnerable. Our personnel show psychological breakdown from mere observation. They attack through corruption rather than conventional combat. Third, Necrons. Ancient civilization with technology that makes Forerunner systems look primitive. Claim to be 60 million years old. View humanity as potential threat requiring elimination. And fourth, he paused, the Imperium of Man. Technically human. Technically allies through Captain Sicarius's advocacy, but doctrinally opposed to everything UNSC represents. Our AI usage violates their laws. Our independence challenges their authority. They're willing to work with us against common threats, but long-term relationship is uncertain. So we're surrounded by genocidal aliens, corrupting demons, ancient machines, and suspicious cousins. Hood summarized with dark humor that made impossible situations sound merely catastrophic. That's actually worse position than we held during Covenant War. At least then we only fought one enemy at a time. Here we're fighting four simultaneously, and we don't have Forerunner artifacts to activate. We don't have Covenant civil war to exploit. We just have... He paused. We just have ourselves, UNSC forces, scattered across unknown region, facing threats our doctrine wasn't designed to counter. Anyone want to suggest how we survive this? Alliance, Captain Sicarius said from his position as observer. His ultramarine presence representing growing coordination between UNSC and Imperial forces. You cannot survive alone. No one survives alone in this galaxy. Not for long. The Imperium has endured 10,000 years through one principle. Unite against greater threats. Set aside differences when extinction is alternative. UNSC possesses capabilities, Imperium values, fast ships, precise weapons, smart tactics. But you lack numbers, lack infrastructure, lack understanding of threats you face. Imperium possesses those things. Together, his voice carried weight. Together we might endure what separately would destroy us. Alliance means subordination, Hood countered with diplomatic directness. Your Inquisition demands we submit to Imperial authority, that we abandon our AI, that we accept Emperor's sovereignty. Those aren't alliance terms, those are surrender conditions. Some within the Inquisition demand that. Sicarius acknowledged with honesty that transcended diplomatic evasion. But Inquisition is not monolithic. We have factions, competing philosophies. I represent faction that values results over doctrine. That recognizes desperate times require flexibility. I can advocate for autonomous alliance. UNSC maintains independence in exchange for military cooperation against common threats. Not subordination, partnership, but his expression hardened. That requires UNSC proving value. Demonstrating that cooperation provides benefits that justify tolerating your technological heresy. You need victory, significant victory, against threat that Imperium struggles to contain. That is political currency that buys you independence. Before Hood could respond, Roland's avatar activated with urgency that suggested immediate crisis. Admiral, we're detecting massive energy signatures at edge of UNSC territory. Multiple contacts, thousands. Energy output suggests... He paused, checking readings again. Suggests Terranid Hive fleet, not scouts. Full invasion force. Headed toward colony designated New Harmony. Population 3 million. They'll reach planetary orbit in 48 hours. And Admiral... His voice carried weight. Our analysis of Arcadia engagement suggests we cannot stop Hive fleet this size with available forces. The mathematics don't work. Even with Imperial support, we're looking at overwhelming numerical superiority. New Harmony will fall. Question is whether we evacuate and abandon colony, or fight and lose fleet trying to defend it. We fight, Hood decided without hesitation, recognizing that some decisions transcended tactical optimization. UNSC doesn't abandon colonies. We demonstrated that principle through entire Covenant War. We maintain it here. Even if mathematics say we lose, even if evacuation is tactically optimal. Because some principles matter more than survival calculations. We fight, we hold, and we prove to Imperium and every other faction watching that UNSC means what we say when we claim humanity's defense is non-negotiable. That is madness, Sicarius observed with tone mixing disapproval and something approaching admiration. You will lose ships, lose lives, potentially lose entire colony despite sacrifice. That is strategically unsound. Emotionally satisfying but tactically catastrophic. That's humanity, Master Chief said from his position in the chamber, his Spartan assessment having processed the variables and reached same conclusion as Hood. We don't fight because mathematics say we'll win. We fight because losing while fighting matters more than surviving through retreat. His voice carried weight that transcended normal military assessment. That's why we survived Covenant War. Not because we were stronger, because we refused to accept that survival required abandoning what made us worth saving. Captain Sicarius, you want demonstration of UNSC value? You want proof that Alliance provides benefits? Watch what happens when we defend New Harmony against impossible odds. Watch how UNSC fights when retreat is option we reject. Then decide whether partnership with us is worth tolerating our AI and independence. Sicarius studied Chief with expression mixing tactical assessment and recognition of kindred warrior philosophy. You speak like Space Marine, like Battle Brother who understands that some things transcend survival. That is, he paused. That is quality I have not observed in baseline humans since Ultramarines were founded. Very well. Ultramarines will support this defense. Not because mathematics favors success, because refusing to abandon humans in need is principle worth dying for. We fight alongside you, we hold against impossible odds, and we demonstrate to Galaxy that humanity, in all its forms, refuses to accept extinction as inevitable. The Emperor protects. Let us see if he protects UNSC as well. Appreciated, Hood acknowledged. All UNSC forces, emergency deployment. New Harmony defense is priority alpha. Every ship, every Spartan, every Marine, we hold that colony. We prove that UNSC survived displacement. We show this galaxy that humanity didn't claw its way to survival across 30 years, just to surrender when facing new threats. And his voice carried determination that had guided Earth through impossible situations. And we make the Tyranids regret choosing UNSC territory as feeding ground. They want to consume us? They'll choke on what they try to swallow. That's promise. That's certainty. Because we're not Covenant, we're not Forerunners, we're humanity, and we're really, really good at surviving when we shouldn't. Across UNSC space, forces mobilized with efficiency born from decades of war. Fleets departing stations, Spartans checking armor, Marines loading weapons, AI coordinating logistics that conventional command couldn't process fast enough. And watching from the shadows, other factions observed with varying degrees of interest. The Imperium, calculating whether UNSC was worth supporting or worth eliminating. The Necrons, monitoring to determine if humanity's Forerunner technology justified extermination. Chaos, whispering corruption that promised power through surrender. And the Tyranids, approaching with hunger that cared nothing for politics or philosophy, or any consideration except biomass awaiting consumption. The battle for New Harmony would determine whether UNSC survived in this galaxy, or became cautionary tale about what happened to civilizations that refused to adapt to reality's brutal mathematics. New Harmony, orbital defense zone, 6 hours before projected Tyranid arrival. The colony had been named with optimism that peacetime allowed. Agricultural world terraformed during humanity's expansion. Population of 3 million living in cities that suggested civilization rebuilding after Covenant War's devastation. Orbital infrastructure designed for commerce rather than military defense. Now it was about to become battlefield. Captain Thomas Lasky stood on the Infinity's bridge watching tactical displays that showed defensive preparations racing against chronometer counting down to invasion. UNSC fleet positioning in high orbit. Ultramarine strike cruiser Macraga's Honor coordinating with human vessels. My orbital defense platforms being hastily upgraded with weapons that engineers insisted weren't ready for combat deployment. "Status," Lasky commanded, his voice cutting through preparation chaos with authority that had coordinated fleet operations through situations where wrong decision meant planetary casualties. "We've got 23 UNSC vessels in defensive positions," Commander Palmer reported from Tactical, her Spartan assessment processing force disposition with combat-enhanced cognition. "Mix of frigates, destroyers, and the Infinity. Total MAC cannon count, 47, missile complement sufficient for sustained engagement, but Captain," her voice carried weight, "our analysis of Arcadia engagement suggests Tyranid Hive fleet operates on completely different scale. We're looking at thousands of bioships, 8 millions of organisms, numerical superiority that makes tactical optimization irrelevant. Even with ultramarine support, we're outnumbered by factors that conventional warfare can't overcome. The mathematics say we lose," Lasky finished with tone suggesting he'd made peace with that assessment. "But mathematics don't account for human factor, don't account for determination, don't account for absolute refusal to accept that some colonies are acceptable losses. We hold because holding matters. Because 3 million people down there deserve to know humanity doesn't abandon them when defense becomes difficult. That's," he paused, "that's principle that kept UNSC together during Covenant War. We maintain it here. On the planet's surface, the Master Chief coordinated ground defense with efficiency that decades of combat had refined. Spartan 2 teams positioning in strategic locations, ODST units establishing fallback positions, and most significantly, civilian evacuation to hardened shelters that would buy time if orbital defense failed." "Chief," Spartan Sarah Palmer transmitted from her position coordinating Fireteam Osiris, "we've got civilian population that's not cooperating with evacuation protocols. Her voice carried frustration. "They're refusing to abandon their homes, saying they survived Covenant raids, saying they trust UNSC to protect them. That's touching, but tactically catastrophic. If Tyranids achieve planetary landing, our civilian presence in urban centers becomes liability we can't afford. Then we ensure they don't achieve planetary landing," Chief replied with Spartan certainty that made impossible sound merely difficult. "Orbital defense holds. Ground forces provide backup if breakthrough occurs, but primary objective is preventing surface contamination. Every organism that lands is biomass the Hive fleet converts. Every conversion makes them stronger. We stop them in orbit. Completely. That's mission parameter." "Understood," Palmer confirmed, though her tone suggested recognition that mission parameters and tactical reality were diverging. "But Chief, if orbital defense fails, if breakthrough occurs despite MAC cannons and ultramarine support, ground forces are facing extinction-level threat with weapons designed for conventional combat. Why, we need contingency for worst-case scenario." "Contingency is we win," Chief stated with voice that had guided Spartans through situations where survival required rejecting possibility of failure. "Because alternative is unacceptable. We don't plan for losing New Harmony. We plan for holding against odds that mathematics say are impossible. That's what Spartans do. That's what UNSC does. We achieve impossible because refusing is worse than dying while trying." Across the colony, Marines and Spartans took positions with discipline that transcended normal military preparation, not just following orders but embracing mission that might be their last. Recognizing that some battles were fought not because victory was certain, but because fighting mattered more than survival. In the Macragas Honors Strategium, Captain Cato Sicarius reviewed tactical projections with expression mixing professional assessment and something approaching respect for UNSC's absolute refusal to accept defeat as foregone conclusion. "Brother Captain," one of his ultramarines observed with voice filtered through Power Armor's Vox speakers, "the humans fight with conviction that rivals our own. They know they face overwhelming odds. They know survival probability is minimal. Yet they position themselves as if victory is certain. That is," he paused, "that is remarkable faith. Almost as if they worship something we cannot see. some principle that gives them strength despite absence of Emperor's light. They worship humanity. Sicarius replied with tone suggesting he'd reached same conclusion through observation rather than theological debate. Not Emperor, not Primarch, not even their own leaders. They worship abstract concept that human civilization is worth defending regardless of cost, that survival without values that make survival meaningful is form of defeat, worse than death. That is, his expression shifted. That is philosophy Ultramarines were founded to embody. Practical idealism. Recognition that some things matter more than strategic optimization. I am beginning to understand why Lord Gilliman might have valued these lost cousins. They think like Ultramarines, fight like us, die like us when necessary. That is worth preserving, even if it means dying alongside them. Then we hold. His subordinate confirmed with conviction that transcended normal tactical assessment. We demonstrate to UNSC that Imperium honors those who fight for humanity's survival. We prove that alliance between our factions is built on shared values rather than temporary convenience, and his voice carried weight. We ensure that if New Harmony falls, it falls with such cost that Tyranid Hive Fleet remembers humanity as prey that bites back. The Emperor protects, but sometimes he protects through ensuring enemy pays blood price for every meter taken. The chronometer reached 0. The Tyranid Hive Fleet emerged from the system's edge with presence that made sensors scream. Bioships ranging from frigate scale to moon-sized leviathans. Organic construction that violated engineering principles, and radiating from every vessel. Hunger that transcended simple biology into force of nature given purpose. Contact, Roland reported with AI processing speed that made human cognition look glacial. His avatar displaying tactical data with resolution that showed nightmare in clinical precision. Hive fleet composition, approximately 4,000 bioships. Organism count estimated at 8 billion based on biomass density readings. Energy signatures suggest synapse creatures coordinating assault. High intelligence variants directing swarm behavior. And Captain, his voice carried alarm that transcended his usual wit. I'm detecting adaptation. They've modified based on Arcadia engagement. Bioships now carry hardened carapaces designed to resist kinetic weapons. They've literally evolved defenses against Mach rounds between battles. That's biological engineering, operating at speeds that shouldn't be possible. They're not just learning from combat. They're pre-adapting based on intelligence gathered from previous encounter. Then we adapt faster, Lasky decided with command authority that refused to acknowledge impossible as excuse for failure. All batteries, target leading elements, fire for effect. Show them that UNSC doesn't repeat tactics just because they worked before. Roland, deploy the countermeasure we discussed, the one that violates 3 different scientific ethics guidelines. The nuclear minefield? Roland asked with tone mixing confirmation and concern. Captain, that's going to irradiate local space for decades. Environmental impact is catastrophic. And the yield... He paused. The yield is going to create secondary radiation that affects our own ships. Ace, we're talking about fighting a nuclear firestorm while engaging enemy that adapts to radiation faster than we can deploy it. Deploy it anyway, Lasky confirmed. Because environment we can clean later. Colony we lose now stays lost. Strategic calculus is clear even if methods are ugly. Fire when ready. The space between New Harmony and approaching Hive Fleet erupted with nuclear fire. Hundreds of warheads detonating in pattern that created radiation barrier, thermal pulses that incinerated organic matter, and electromagnetic interference that disrupted Tyranid coordination. The Hive Fleet burned. Billions of organisms died in initial bombardment. Bioships dissolving under thermal assault that made their adaptive armor irrelevant against sustained nuclear yields. But the swarm didn't retreat, didn't hesitate, didn't show any reaction except continuing advance through radiation that would have killed conventional biological forces. They're absorbing it, Roland reported with voice carrying horror that transcended normal tactical updates. The organisms are dying, but the Hive Fleet is consuming the radiation, converting it into biomass through processes our biology can't explain. They're literally eating nuclear fire and using it to fuel regeneration. That's not adaptation. That's physics violation. They're treating laws of thermodynamics as suggestions rather than constraints. Then we make the suggestions more forceful, Lasky replied, recognizing that conventional weapons were inadequate. Mach cannons, concentrated fire, target synapse creatures, eliminate coordination nodes. They turn swarm into individual organisms rather than directed force. That's vulnerability. They're strong when coordinated, significantly weaker when operating independently. The Infinity's Mach batteries spoke with thunder that made space itself uncomfortable. Hypervelocity rounds traveling at 4% light speed, each impact carrying kinetic energy measured in gigatons, targeting bioships that coordinated swarm behavior with precision that AI processing provided. The synapse creatures died. The swarm faltered. For exactly 17 seconds, Tyranid coordination collapsed as hive mind lost its directing intelligence, individual organisms operating on instinct rather than collective strategy. Then, new synapse creatures emerged from reserve forces, the hive mind adapting by redundancy, ensuring that eliminating coordinators merely triggered replacement rather than systemic failure. They planned for that, Palmer observed with tactical assessment that recognized enemy sophistication. They knew we'd target command structures, so they built redundancy. Backup coordinators ready to replace losses. That's military doctrine operating at biological level. They think like us, plan like us, except they implement through evolution rather than training. That's fighting enemy that learns from every encounter and implements lessons through genetic modification rather than doctrinal revision. The Ultramarines engaged with weapons that transcended UNSC standard. Lance batteries that fired concentrated energy beams, bombardment cannons that launched explosive shells the size of tanks, and most devastating, Nova cannon that fired projectiles with yields that made nuclear weapons look restrained. The Imperial firepower was less precise than UNSC targeting, but operated at scale that made precision irrelevant. Saturation bombardment that eliminated threats through overwhelming force rather than surgical strikes. The Imperials fight like they're trying to break the universe, Roland observed with analysis that mixed admiration and concern. No precision, no efficiency, just overwhelming application of firepower until problems stop existing. That's actually terrifying effectiveness against enemy that depends on numbers. Tyranids can't outnumber bombardment that treats local space as acceptable casualty zone. But even combined UNSC Imperial firepower had limits. The Hive fleet continued advancing, accepting catastrophic casualties with biological indifference that made attrition warfare ineffective, organisms dying by billions, but being replaced faster than defenders could eliminate them. They're going to achieve orbital insertion, Palmer reported with controlled urgency. We've killed thousands of bioships, billions of organisms, but the swarm keeps coming. We're running low on ammunition. Our Mach cannons are overheating from sustained fire. And Captain, her voice carried weight. Tactical analysis suggests breakthrough within 30 minutes. Once they achieve planetary orbit, ground defense becomes only option. And ground defense against billions of organisms is what Spartans were designed for, Chief transmitted from surface, his voice carrying across tactical networks with certainty that transcended normal military assessment. We hold the line. Every Spartan, every ODST, every Marine who understands that some positions don't get abandoned regardless of cost. They want new harmony? They pay for every meter. They pay with biomass we destroy faster than they can regenerate. And they learn, his tone hardened, they learn that consuming UNSC territory means choking on what they try to swallow. The first Tyranid organisms breached orbital defense. Mycetic spores, organic drop pods carrying combat forms, descended through atmosphere with violence that made meteor impacts look gentle, their trajectory calculations bypassing point defense through sheer numbers, and landing across New Harmony's surface with precision that suggested hive mind understood planetary geography better than defenders expected. Chief watched through his HUD as spores impacted 3 kilometers from his position. organic matter splitting to release creatures that made Covenant elite warriors look inadequate. Carnifexes, living tanks armed with bioweapons that could shred UNSC armor. Hormagaunts, swarm organisms designed for overwhelming numerical assault. And coordinating them, hive tyrants, synapse creatures that directed battlefield tactics with intelligence that rivaled human commanders. "Contact," Chief transmitted with characteristic brevity, his MA-40 assault rifle already engaging targets that emerged from spore landing sites. Multiple Tyranid variants, mixed combat forms, they're establishing beachhead positions. Recommend immediate response before they achieve critical mass. Fireteam Osiris converged on Chief's position with Spartan efficiency, coordinated movement that made 5 enhanced soldiers fight like platoon, their weapons targeting weak points that combat experience identified, their tactics exploiting biological vulnerabilities that conventional forces missed. But for every organism they eliminated, 3 more emerged from follow-up spores, the hive fleet deploying reserves with biological efficiency that made resupply look instantaneous. "We can't kill them fast enough," Spartan Jameson Locke observed with tactical honesty that transcended optimistic assessment. "Every wave we stop, another lands. Every position we hold, they bypass. This isn't conventional warfare. This is fighting tide, and tide doesn't stop. It just keeps coming until everything drowns. We need—" He paused, recognizing what he was about to suggest violated normal protocols. "We need to collapse the beachheads. Orbital strike our own positions. Deny them foothold even if it means sacrificing ground forces in the impact zone." "Negative," Chief replied with authority that Spartan 2 rank provided despite Locke technically being his equal. "We don't sacrifice positions while they're still defendable. We fight, we hold. And we trust that orbital defense eliminates hive fleet before ground situation becomes untenable. That's—" His shields flared as Carnifex bioweapon struck Mjolnir armor. "That's operational plan. We execute it until circumstances force revision. Stand your ground." That's order. The battle that followed would be studied by military historians across both galaxies. How Spartans fought biological nightmare that outnumbered them by millions. Their tactics turning individual superiority into force multiplier that conventional mathematics couldn't account for. Their absolute refusal to retreat, making defensive positions into fortresses that swarm broke against, rather than overwhelming. But even Spartan capability had limits. Chief's ammunition counter dropped towards 0. His shields flickered under sustained assault. His armor's systems flagged damage that would require weeks of repair if he survived the next hour. Then reinforcement arrived from unexpected source. Imperial Thunderhawk gunships descended through atmosphere with engines screaming defiance at physics, and their armored hulls weathering Tyranid bioweapons that would have shredded conventional aircraft, deploying cargo that made even Chief pause with recognition of what Imperium was committing to ground defense. Space Marines, Ultramarine 2nd Company, 200 battle brothers, each one in power armor that made Mjolnir look restrained, carrying bolters that fired explosive rounds, supported by tactical doctrine refined through 10,000 years of warfare. Captain Sicarius hit the ground with impact that cratered Ferrocrete, his power sword igniting with energy field that made the air uncomfortable, his voice transmitting across all frequencies with authority that made suggestion sound like divine mandate. "Brothers, we fight alongside UNSC forces. We demonstrate that when humanity stands united, no Xenos threat can break our line. For the Emperor, for Ultramar, for the principle that human civilization is worth every drop of blood we shed in its defense. Forward!" The Space Marines charged with coordination that made military precision look like art form, overlapping fields of fire, coordinated assault patterns, tactics that exploited Tyranid weaknesses through experience gained from centuries fighting similar threats. And fighting beside them, Spartans. Chief watched as Space Marine and Spartan operated in parallel. Similar capabilities achieved through different methods, comparable effectiveness despite divergent philosophies. Warriors from 2 fragments of humanity, proving that shared purpose transcended doctrinal differences. "This is working," Locke observed, with voice carrying something approaching wonder. Space Marines fight like Spartans. We fight like Space Marines. Together we're... He eliminated Hormigaunt with precision headshot. Together we're actually making numerical superiority irrelevant through combined tactical superiority. That's proving alliance works. That cooperation between UNSC and Imperium is viable strategy rather than desperate hope. It's proving more than that, Chief replied, his tactical network showing Tyranid advance faltering across multiple fronts. It's proving humanity survives by standing together. That's lesson worth learning, worth dying for if necessary, worth... The ground erupted. Not from spore impact, from something worse. Bio-Titan, Hierophant class. 50 meters of organic nightmare, armed with biocannons that fired acid strong enough to dissolve tank armor. Armored with carapace that could withstand sustained bombardment and coordinating through it. Hive mind intelligence that made it tactical asset rather than simple monster. Contact, Chief transmitted with urgency that transcended normal tactical updates. Bio-Titan emerging from underground approach, they tunneled, bypassed surface defense through subterranean infiltration. We're looking at threat that requires concentrated firepower. All available units converge on... The Bio-Titan's weapons discharged with violence that made the battlefield look like surface of sun. Bioplasma that melted everything it touched. Acid sprays that dissolved armor and flesh with equal efficiency. Psychic scream that made baseline humans collapse with neural overload. Spartans weathered the assault through Mjolnir's enhanced shielding. The Space Marines endured through ceramite armor and centuries of combat experience. But supporting UNSC Marines, baseline humans in standard armor, died by the dozens, their equipment inadequate against threat operating beyond conventional weapon parameters. We need orbital strike, Locke assessed with tactical honesty. That thing is going to break our defensive line, going to create breakthrough that allows Swarm to flood past our positions. We need Mac round, Nova cannon, something that hits with enough force to... Negative, Lasky's voice cut through tactical network with controlled urgency. Orbital batteries are fully committed to fleet engagement. We cannot divert fire support to ground targets without compromising space superiority. You need to handle Bio-Titan with available resources. He paused, checking tactical displays. I'm sorry, but that's reality. Ground forces are on their own for next 20 minutes minimum. Chief processed variables with Spartan assessment algorithms. Bio-Titan required firepower that ground forces didn't possess in concentration necessary for elimination. Supporting units were dying faster than could be replaced, and breakthrough would occur within minutes if situation didn't change. Standard tactics were inadequate, which meant improvisation was necessary. Spartans, form on me, Chief commanded with authority that decades of combat leadership provided. We're going direct assault, target weak points, bypass armor, eliminate through precision rather than overwhelming force, and... He checked his remaining equipment. And we demonstrate why Spartans were worth every ethical compromise their creation required. Locke, you're with me. Osiris provides supporting fire. Space Marines. He transmitted to Sicarius. Recommend you maintain perimeter. We handle the Titan. You ensure nothing else breaks through while we're committed. Understood. Sicarius confirmed with tone mixing approval and recognition of what Chief was proposing. But Master Chief, that creature weighs hundreds of tons. Its armor can withstand tank rounds. You are proposing to fight it with small arms and determination. That is... He paused. That is exactly what Space Marine would do. Emperor, speed your assault. We hold the line. You kill the monster. Simple division of labor between warriors who understand that impossible is challenge rather than limitation. Chief advanced toward the Bio-Titan with speed that MJOLNIR's enhanced mobility provided. Locke matching pace, and both Spartans moving with coordination born from shared training despite never having operated together before this deployment. The Bio-Titan detected their approach, its weapons tracking with biological precision that made targeting computers look slow. Chief dodged bioplasma through combination of enhanced reflexes and tactical prediction, his neural interface processing threat vectors faster than normal cognition could achieve. his movements making 50-meter monsters' weapons miss by centimeters. Locke engaged weak points with surgical precision, armor seams, sensory organs, synaptic nodes that coordinated the creature's massive form, each shot calculated to cause maximum disruption rather than simple damage. But the Bio-Titan was adapting. Its armor thickened where they struck. Its weapons adjusted to their movement patterns. The hive mind was learning from engagement in real time, evolving defenses faster than Spartans could exploit vulnerabilities. "It's getting smarter," Locke observed with tactical assessment devoid of panic. "Learning our patterns, adapting to our tactics. We need to kill it fast before it evolves complete immunity to our weapons. Chief, recommend..." Chief didn't respond verbally. Instead, he executed maneuver that training said was suicidal, but combat experience suggested was only option. Direct charge toward Bio-Titan's central mass, using grappling hook from equipment that Forerunner reverse engineering had provided, launching himself toward creature that could kill him with casual swipe. He landed on its carapace with impact that would have shattered normal bones. Mjolnir's servo systems distributing force that would have been fatal, his armor's strength allowing him to maintain position on surface designed to shed anything that attempted to cling. The Bio-Titan thrashed, attempting to dislodge him through movements that made earthquakes look gentle. Chief held position through combination of enhanced strength and absolute refusal to acknowledge that grip could be broken, his free hand deploying plasma grenade directly onto exposed neural cluster that coordinated the creature's massive form. The detonation was precise, surgical, catastrophically effective. The Bio-Titan's coordination collapsed as synaptic node was destroyed, its massive form losing cohesion, individual biological components ceasing to function as integrated system. It fell with impact that made the ground shake. Its death throes crushing remaining organisms in vicinity, its biomass already being consumed by Hive Fleet's recycling protocols that ensured even death provided resources. Chief landed in defensive crouch, his shields depleted, his armor damaged, his ammunition nearly exhausted. But the Bio-Titan was dead. And across the battlefield, UNSC and Imperial forces rallied with recognition that impossible had been achieved. Bio-Titan eliminated through tactics that conventional doctrine said were inadequate. Ground defense holding despite numerical superiority that should have been overwhelming. Orbital defense reports Hive Fleet is withdrawing. Roland transmitted with voice-carrying relief that transcended normal AI composure. "We've inflicted casualties approaching 60% of their invasion force. Our biomass loss is unsustainable even for Tyranids. They're retreating. Not defeated, but recognizing that cost of consuming new harmony exceeds value of biomass gained. His voice carried something approaching wonder. "We've won. Against odds that every tactical model said were impossible, we've actually won." The cheering that erupted across tactical networks transcended professional military discipline, survivors recognizing they'd achieved victory that mathematics said was impossible, defenders proving that human determination could overcome numerical superiority when refusing defeat. But Chief didn't cheer. He counted casualties. 47 UNSC vessels damaged, 12 destroyed completely. 317 Spartans and ODSTs killed in ground combat. There 2,643 Marines dead defending positions that tactics said were indefensible. And New Harmony survived. 3 million colonists saved through sacrifice that conventional cost-benefit analysis said was strategically unsound, but morally necessary. "Was it worth it?" Locke asked, with voice carrying weight of survivors who'd watched comrades die. "All those casualties, all those ships, all that sacrifice, for one colony, for 3 million people. Was defending them worth the cost?" Chief's response carried certainty that decades of combat had refined. Yes, because Alternative was teaching Galaxy that UNSC abandons colonies when defense becomes difficult, that we calculate acceptable losses based on strategic optimization rather than principle. That's lesson we can't afford to teach. Not here. Not in Galaxy, where humanity's survival depends on proving we're worth allying with. We demonstrated that UNSC means what we say when we claim human defense is non-negotiable. That's worth every ship lost, worth every life sacrificed, because it establishes precedent that keeps future colonies from being abandoned when mathematics suggest defense is impossible. Across New Harmony's surface, survivors began emerging from shelters, looking at sky where Hive Fleet had withdrawn, recognizing they'd survived through sacrifice of soldiers who refused to accept that some colonies were acceptable losses. And watching from orbit, other factions observed with varying assessments. The Imperium, calculating that UNSC was worth supporting because forces willing to die defending civilians were rare enough to justify tolerating their technological heresy. The Necrons, monitoring to determine if humanity's victory suggested capabilities worth eliminating or worth exploiting. Chaos, whispering that such sacrifice was foolish, that power through surrender was more efficient than victory through death. But UNSC had demonstrated principle that transcended tactical optimization. Humanity survived by refusing to accept that survival required abandoning values that made survival meaningful. That was lesson the Warhammer 40k galaxy needed, whether it wanted to learn it or not. Deep space, edge of UNSC territory. 2 weeks after New Harmony, Dr. Catherine Halsey stood before holographic display, showing readings that violated every principle of physics she'd spent 40 years studying. Energy signatures that existed simultaneously in real space, and the warp, architecture that manipulated dimensions UNSC science couldn't detect, and buried at the structure's core. Technology that made Forerunner artifacts look derivative. "What is it?" Admiral Hood asked, studying the same data with command experience that recognized strategic significance even when scientific understanding was lacking. "I don't know," Halsey admitted with scientific honesty that transcended normal certainty. "But preliminary analysis suggests it's older than Forerunners, predates Necrons, might even predate War in Heaven, that Imperial database's reference. This is," she processed implications. "This is first-generation technology, foundation that everything else was built upon. If we can understand it, if we can reverse engineer even fraction of its capabilities." Her voice carried weight. "We might survive this galaxy. We might even master it. Or," she paused, "or we might break something that was buried for good reason. Something that civilizations far more advanced than us decided was too dangerous to use. That's risk we need to acknowledge before proceeding. Risk we're taking anyway," Hood decided with command authority that had guided humanity through impossible situations. "Because without understanding this galaxy's fundamental technologies, we're always going to be disadvantaged, always reacting rather than acting, always one step behind threats that understand physics we can't comprehend. We study this, carefully, with every precaution, but we study it. Because knowledge is only advantage we can develop that other factions can't simply overwhelm through superior numbers or ancient experience." "Agreed," Halsey confirmed. "But Admiral, understand what we're proposing. We're attempting to understand technology that manipulates warp and real space simultaneously. That suggests whoever built this could control chaos itself, could weaponize dimensions, could," she paused, recognizing implications, "could potentially seal the warp completely, or open it entirely. That's power that makes Forerunner installations look restrained. That's capability that could save humanity, or doom it, or both. And we won't know which until we try." "Then we try carefully," Hood replied with pragmatism that had sustained UNSC through 30 years of desperate warfare. "We survived Covenant War through refusing to accept that impossible meant unachievable. We survived displacement through adapting faster than threats could overwhelm us. We'll survive this galaxy the same way, through determination, through innovation, through absolute refusal to accept that humanity's story ends here. We study the artifact, we unlock its secrets, and we prove that UNSC didn't survive Covenant War just to surrender in New Galaxy. That's," his voice carried determination, "that's certainty, not hope. Certainty born from understanding that humanity survives by refusing to accept defeat as inevitable. We've done it before. We'll do it again, no matter what this galaxy throws at us." And deep within the ancient structure, systems that had been dormant since before human civilization emerged began responding to presence of beings who combined forerunner technology with human determination. Mechanisms activated, protocols engaged, and something that had been waiting for exactly the right combination of capability and desperation began preparing to reveal itself. The UNSC had survived first contact with Warhammer 40k galaxy, but survival was just beginning. Because what they discovered wasn't just ancient technology, it was test to determine if humanity, in all its divergent forms, deserved to inherit legacy that civilizations spanning millions of years had been building toward. And failure meant extinction, not just for UNSC, for humanity across both galaxies. The war wasn't over, it was about to truly begin,